Hi, my lovely children, grandchildren. We're starting chapter 2, Peter Pan. Okay. Chapter 2. Miss Darlington screamed, as if into a bell. The door opened. Nana inserted and returned from her evening out. She growled and sprang at the boy, who leaped lightly through the window. Again Miss Darling screamed, this time in distress for him, for she thought he was killed. And she ran into the street to look for the little boy, the little body, but it was not there. And she looked up, and in the black of the night she could see nothing but what she thought was a shooting star. She returned to the nursery and found Nana with something in her mouth, which proved to be the boy's shadow. As it kept at the window, Nana had closed it quickly. Too late to catch him, but his shadow had not had time to get out. Slam went the window and snap it off. You may be sure Miss Darling examined the shadow carefully, but it was quite the ordinary kind. Nana had no doubt of what was the best thing to do with the shadow. She hung it out at the window, meaning he is sure to come back for it. Excuse me. Let us put it where he can get it easily without disturbing the children. But unfortunately, Miss Darlington could not leave it hanging out the window. It looked so like the washing and lowered the whole tone of the house. She thought of showing it to Mr. Darlington, but he was toddling up winter gray coats for John and Michael, and with a wet towel around his head to keep his brain clear. It seemed a shame to have troubled him. Besides, she knew exactly what he would say. It all comes of having a dog for a nurse. She decided to roll up the shadow and put it away carefully in a drawer until a fitting opportunity came for telling her husband. Ah, me. The opportunity came a week later on that. Never to be forgotten Friday. Of course, it was Friday. I ought to have been especially careful on Friday. She used to say afterwards to her husband, while perhaps Nana was on the other side of her, holding her hand. No, Miss Darlington always said, I am responsible for all of it. I, George Darlington, did it. Me, culpa. He had a classical education. They sat the night after night, recalling the fatal Friday, till every detail of it was stamped on. Fatal Friday, till every detail was stamped on. Their brains had come through on the other side like their faces on the bad coinage. If only I had not accepted the invitation to dine at 27, Miss Darlington said. If only I had not poured my medicine into Nana's bowl, said Mr. Darlington. If only I had pretended to like the medicine. What was Nana's wet eyes sad? My liking for parties, George, my fatal gift of humor, dearest, my touchiness about trifle, dear master and mistress. And then one or more of them would break down altogether. Now it was at the thought, it's true. They ought not have had a dog for a nurse. Many a time it was Mr. Darlington who put the handkerchief to Nana's eyes. That's friend, said Mr. Darlington. Wouldn't cry, and Nana barked was the echo of it, but Mrs. Darlington never abated Peter. There was something in it, in the right-hand corner of her mouth, that wanted her not to call Peter's name. They would sit there in the empty nursery, recalling fondly every smallest detail of the dreadful evening. It had begun so inadvertently, so precisely, like 100 other evenings, with Nana putting on the wet water for Michael's bath and carrying him into it on her back. "I won't go to bed," he had shouted, like one who still believed that he had the last word on the subject. I won't, Nana. It isn't 6 o'clock yet. Oh dear, oh dear. I shan't love you any more, Nana. I tell you, I won't be bathed. I won't. Then Mr. Darlington had come in, wearing her white evening gown. She had dressed early because Wendy so loved to see her in her evening gown, with the necklace George had given her. She was wearing Wendy's bracelet on her arm. She asked for the loan of it. Wendy loved to lend her bracelet to her mother. She had found her 2 older children playing at being herself and father on occasion of Wendy's birth, and John was saying, "I am happy to inform you, Mrs. Darlington, that you are now a mother," in just such a tone as Mr. Darlington himself may have used on the real occasion. Wendy had danced with joy, just as real as Miss Darlington must have done. Then John was born, with an extra pump that he conceived due to the birth of a male. And Michael came out from his bath to ask to be born also, but John said brutally that they did not want any more. Michael had nearly cried. "Nobody wants me," he said, and of course the lady of the evening dress could not stand it. "I do," she said. "I so want a 3rd child." "Boy, girl?" asked Michael. "Not too hopefully boy?" Then he had leaped up into her arms, such a little thing for Mr. and Mrs. Darlington and Nana to recall now, but not so little if that it was to be Michael's last night in the nursery. Then go on with their recollection. It was then that a rush in Okay. Where was I? It was then that I rushed in like a tornado, wasn't it? Mr. Darlington would say, scorn himself. And indeed had been like a tornado. Perhaps there was some excuse for him. He too had been dressing up for a party, and all had gone well with him until he came to his tie. It is an astonishing thing to have to tell, but this man, though he knew about stocks, shares, and had no real mastery on his tie, sometimes the thing yielded to him without the consent, but there were an occasion when it would have been better for the house if he had swallowed his pride and used a make-up tie. That's a tie that sticks. You don't have to tie it. This was such an occasion. He came rushing into the nursery with this crumbled-up little brute of a tie in his hand. "Why, what's the matter, Father dear?" "Matter?" he yelled. He really yelled. "This tie! It will not tie!" He became dangerously sarcastic. "Not around my neck. Round the bedpost. Oh yes, 20 times I have made it up around the bedpost. But around my neck? No. Oh dear no. begs to be excused." He thought Miss Darlington was not sufficiently impressed, and he went on sternly. "I warn you of this, Mother. That useless this tie is around my neck. We don't go out to dinner tonight. And if I don't go out to dinner tonight, I'll never go to the office again. And if I don't go to the office again, you and I starve, and our children will be flung into the streets." Even Miss Darlington was plastic. "Let me try, dear," she said. And indeed, that was what he had come to ask her to do. And with her nice, cool hands, she tied his tie for him while the children stood around to see their fate decided. Some men would have resented her being able to do it so easily, but Mr. Darlington had far too fine of a nature for that. He thanked her carelessly, and once forgotten his rage, and in another moment was dancing around the room with Michael on his back. "How wildly we romp," he says, Miss Darlington, now recalling it. "Our last romp," Mr. Darlington groaned. "Oh, George, do you remember?" Michael suddenly said to me. "How did you get to know me, Mother?" "I remember. They were rather sweet, don't you think, George?" And they went, and they were ours, and now they are gone. The romp had ended with the appearance of Nana, and the most unluckily Mr. Darlington collided against her, covering his trousers with his hair. Then they were not only new trousers, but they were the first he had ever worn braided on them, and he had to bite his lip to prevent the tears from coming. Of course, Miss Darlington brushed him, but he begged to talk again about his being a mistake to have a dog for a nurse. "George, Nana's a treasure, no doubt, but I have an uneasy feeling at times that she looks upon the children as puppies." "Oh, no, dear one. I feel sure that she knows they have souls." "I wonder," Mr. Darlington said thankfully, "I wonder, was the opportunity his wife felt for telling him about the boy? At first, the pooh-poohed the story, but he became thoughtful when she showed him the shadow. "It is nobody I know," he said, examining it carefully, "but it does look like a scoundrel." "We were still discussing it, you remember," said Mr. Darlington, "when Nana came in with Michael's medicine. You will never carry the bottle in your mouth again, Nana, and it is all my fault. Strong man though he was, there is no doubt that he had behaved rather foolishly over the medicine. If he had a weakness, it was for that, thinking that all his life he had been taking medicine boldly. And so now, when Michael dodged the spoon in Nana's mouth, he had said repeatedly, 'Be a man, Michael.'" Won't, Michael cried naughtily. Miss Darlington left the room to get the children chocolate for him, and Mr. Darlington thought this showed what of firmness. "Mother, don't pamper him," he called after her. "Michael, when I was your age, I took medicine without a murmur. I said, 'Thank you, kind parents, for giving me bottles to make me well.'" He really thought this was true, and Wendy, who was now in her nightgown, believed it also. And she said, to encourage Michael, "The medicine you sometimes take, Father, is much nastier, isn't it?" "Ever so much nastier," Mr. Darlington said bravely. "And I would take it now as an example for you, Michael, if I hadn't lost the bottle." He had not exactly lost the bottle. He had climbed into the dead of night to the top of the wardrobe and hidden it there. What he did not know was that the faithful Liz had found it and put it back on his washstand. "I know where it is, Father," Wendy cried. "Always glad to be of service. I'll bring it." And she was off before he could stop her. Immediately, his spirit sank in the strangest way. "John," he said, shuddering, "it's most beastly stuff. It's the nastiest, stickiest, sweet kind. It will soon be over, Father," John said cheerfully. And then in a rush, Wendy would take the medicine in a glass. "I have been as quick as I could," she panted. "You have been wonderfully quick," her father retorted with a vindictive politeness that was quite shone away upon her. "Michael first," he said doggedly. "Father first," said Michael, who was of a surprising nature. "I shall be sick, you know," Mr. Darlington said threateningly. "Come on, Father," said John. "Hold your tongue, John," his father rapped out. "Wendy," quite puzzled. "I thought you took it quite easily, Father." "That's not the point," he retorted. "The point is that there is more in my glass than in Michael's spoon." His poor heart was nearly bursting, and it isn't fair. I wouldn't say it, though it were with my last breath. It isn't fair. "Father, I'm waiting," said Michael coldly. "It's all very well to say that you are waiting. So am I waiting, Father, cowardly custard. So are you a cowardly custard? I am not frightened. Neither am I frightened." "Well then, take it." "Well then, you take it." Wendy had a splendid idea. "Why not both of you take it at the same time?" "Certainly," said Mr. Darlington. "Are you ready, Michael?" Wendy gave the words. 1, 2, 3, and Michael took his medicine, but Mr. Darlington sipped his behind his back. There was a yell of rage from Michael, and "Oh, Father," Wendy examined. "What do you mean by 'oh, Father'?" Mr. Darlington demanded. "Stop and row, Michael. I mean to take mine, but I missed it. It was dreadful, the way all three were looking at him, just as if they didn't admire him. Look here, all of you," he said threateningly. As soon as Nana had gone to the bedroom, "I have just thought of a splendid joke. I shall pour my medicine into Nana's bowl, and she will drink it, thinking it's her milk." It was the color of milk, but the children did not have their father's sense of humor, and they looked at him reproachfully as he poured the medicine into Nana's bowl. "What fun," he said doubtfully, and they did not dare expose him when Miss Darlington and Nana returned. "Nana, good dog," he said, patting her. "I have put a little milk in your bowl, Nana." Nana wagged her tail and ran to the medicine and began lapping it. Then she gave Mr. Darlington such a look, not even an angry look. She showed him the great red tear that made us so sorry for noble dogs, and creeped into her kernel. Mr. Darlington was frightfully ashamed of himself, but he would not give in. In a horrid silence, Mrs. Darlington smelt the bowl. "Oh, George," she said, "it's your medicine." "It was only a joke," he retorted. Well, she comforted her boys, and Wendy's hugged Nana. "Much good," he said bitterly. "My weary myself to the bone trying to be funny in this house." And still Wendy hugged Nana. "That's right," he shouted. "Coddle her. Nobody coddles me. Oh dear no. I'm the breadwinner. Why should I be coddled? Why? George!" Miss Darlington threatened him. Not so loud. The servant will hear you. Somehow they had gone into the way of calling Lizzie the servant. Let 'em, he said. He answered recklessly. Bring in the whole world. But I refuse to allow that dog to lord in my nursery for an hour longer. The children wept, and Nana ran to him beseechingly, but he waved her back. He felt he was a strong man again. In vain, he cried. The proper place for you in the yard, and there you go, to be tied up in this instant. George! George! Miss Darlington whispered. Remember what I told you about the boy. Alas, he would not listen. He was determined to show who was master in the house, and when he commanded, would not draw Nana from the knees. When he could not get Nana to come out from the corral. He lured her out of it with honey words, and seized her roughly, dragged her from the nursery. He was ashamed of himself, and yet he did it. It was all owing to his too affectionate nature, which craved for admiration. When he had tied her up in the backyard, the wretched father went and sat in the passage, with his knuckles to his eyes. In the meantime, Miss Darlington had put the children to bed in an unwonted silence, and lit their night lights. They could hear Nana barking, and John whimpering. Is it because he is chaining her up in the yard? But Wendy was wiser. That is not Nana's unhappy bark, she said. Listen, guessing what was about to happen. That is her bark when she smells danger. Danger? Are you sure, Wendy? Oh, yes. Miss Darlington quivered and went to the window. It was securely fastened. She looked out in the night and was peering with the stars. Then they were crowding around the house, as if curious to see what was to take place there. But she did not notice this, nor that one or two of the smaller ones winked at her. Yet her nameless fear clutched at her heart and made her cry. Oh, how I wish I wasn't going to that party tonight. Even Michael, already half asleep, knew that she was perturbed, and he asked, Can anything harm us, Mother, after the night lights are lit? Nothing, precious, she said. They are the eyes of mothers leaves behind to guard her children. She went from bed to bed, singing enchantments over them. Then little Michael flung his arms around his mother. He cried, I'm glad of you. They were the last words she was to hear from him for a long time. Number 27 was only a few yards distant, but there had been a silent fall in the snow. Father and Mother Darling picked up their ways over a duft not to soil their shoes. They were already the only persons in the street, and all the stars were watching them. Stars are beautiful, but they may not take an active part in anything. They must just look on forever. Is it punishment put on them for something they did so long ago that no star now knows what it was? So the older ones have become glassy-eyed, seldom speaking, winking its star language. But the little ones still wonder. They are not really friendly to Peter, who had a mischievous way of stealing up behind them and trying to blow them out. But they are so fond of fun, and they went on his side tonight and anxious to get the grown-ups out of the way. So As soon as the door of 27 closed on Mr. and Mrs. Darling, there was a commotion in the firmament, and the smallest of the all-stars in the Milky Way screamed out, "Now, Peter!" That was the end of chapter 2. We'll do chapter 3 tomorrow. I love you. Sweet dreams.